She signed his name for money and ended up with his heart. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. It all started on a rainy Thursday evening in New York City. The cafe was nearly empty, its windows fogged with steam and reflections of passing taxis. Emma Brooks sat at the corner table, staring at the bottom of her chipped coffee cup, counting the coins left in her hand. 57 cents. That was all. Her landlord had already taped the eviction notice on her door, her father's medical bills kept piling up, and her freelance translation work had all but dried up. The bell above the cafe door chimed softly, and a tall man in a charcoal gray suit stepped inside. He looked out of place amid the chipped tables and buzzing neon light, a man made of calm precision. His name was Alexander Reed, CEO of the Reed Hospitality Group, one of the most powerful hotel chains in the country. But tonight, he was simply a man with a problem, the clause in his late father's will that demanded he be married before his 35th birthday, which was only 6 months away, or lose control of the company to his ruthless cousin. He spotted Emma sitting alone and walked straight toward her. "Miss Brooks," he said in a voice smooth as glass. She blinked up at him, startled. "Do I know you?" "Not yet," he replied, sliding a folder across the table. "But you might want to hear what is inside before you decide." Inside was a single-page contract. 6 months of marriage. Public appearances. Discretion. Compensation $200,000, paid upon completion. Her pulse stumbled. "You are serious," she whispered. "Completely," he said. "This is a business arrangement, nothing more. You help me, and I will solve your financial problems." The weight of her father's unpaid hospital bills pressed against her chest. She had spent her whole life saying no to easy ways out. But this was not easy. This was survival. She swallowed hard, her voice barely steady. "And after 6 months? We go our separate ways," he said, his gaze unreadable. Clean, professional, and quiet. The cafe's clock ticked in the silence that followed. Outside, the rain streaked down the glass like tears she refused to shed. Finally, she picked up the pen from the table. "Where do I sign?" Alexander leaned forward, the corner of his mouth curving slightly, not quite a smile, but not entirely cold. "Right next to my name," he said. And as the tip of the pen touched the paper, neither of them knew that this single signature made for money, born of desperation, would one day bind their hearts in ways no contract ever could. The ink on the contract was barely dry when Emma followed Alexander out of the cafe and into a waiting black sedan. The rain had stopped, but the city still glistened under the streetlights. She pressed her hands together on her lap, her mind racing. What had she just done? Across from her, Alexander sat in silence, scrolling through his phone, composed as ever. The car stopped in front of an elegant brownstone building in Midtown. "You will stay here for now," he said as the driver opened the door. "It will be easier for the public to believe we live together." Emma hesitated. The marble steps, the brass door handle, the uniformed doorman, this was not her world. Inside, the apartment looked like a magazine spread, glass walls, muted colors, and the faint scent of cedar and expensive coffee. "There is a guest room upstairs," Alexander said. "Your belongings will arrive tomorrow. We will have a briefing with my assistant at 9 a.m. to review appearances and behavior guidelines." His tone was professional, almost detached. She nodded, trying to look composed, but her knees trembled. When he disappeared into his study, she let out the breath she had been holding and wandered toward the window. From there, New York stretched out like a field of light. Somewhere in that glow were the hospital bills that had brought her here, and the father who believed she had landed a respectable job. That night she could not sleep. The silence of wealth was different, it had weight. Every clock tick, every soft hum of the refrigerator reminded her she did not belong. Morning came with the quiet shuffle of staff. A woman named Claire introduced herself as Alexander's chief assistant. "Good morning, Mrs. Reed," she said politely. The title startled Emma every time. "You will need wardrobe fittings and basic media training," Claire continued, handing her a clipboard. "Mr. Reed's first public event as a married man will be the Winter Charity Gala, 2 weeks from today." Later that morning, Alexander appeared in a tailored navy suit, his tie perfectly aligned. "You look pale," he remarked. "Have you eaten?" "Coffee counts, right?" she said weakly. His lips curved just slightly. "That is not food. Come on." He led her to the breakfast table, where silver dishes gleamed under soft light. For a moment, she saw a trace of warmth behind the perfect Iona man who had forgotten what normal felt like. As the days passed, their lives merged into a rhythm of rehearsed civility. Publicly, he held her hand. Privately, he kept his distance. Yet sometimes, between the briefings and the camera flashes, she caught him watching her. Not like a CEO assessing an employee, but like someone seeing something unexpected. One evening, while preparing for a photo shoot, she struggled with the zipper of a dress. "Allow me," Alexander said quietly, stepping behind her. His fingers brushed the fabric, steady and precise. Their eyes met in the mirror, and for a heartbeat, the air shifted too close, too real. He stepped back first. "We have a schedule to keep," he said, voice clipped. That night, Emma sat at her vanity staring at her reflection. The woman in the mirror wore designer clothes and diamond earrings, but behind her eyes was the same girl who counted coins at a café table. What had begun as a contract was turning into something far more complicated. She tried to remind herself of the rules: no love, no attachment, no lines crossed. But rules were easy to sign and hard to live by. The next morning, Claire handed her a tablet filled with press headlines: Alexander Reed's mystery wife stuns society, from nowhere to nobility. Emma sighed. "Do they always sound like this?" "Every story needs a fairy tale," Claire replied with a knowing smile. "Just remember, yours has an expiration date." That evening, as the city lights flickered below their penthouse windows, Alexander found Emma sketching quietly at the dining table. "You draw?" he asked, surprised. She nodded. "It helps me think." He studied the sketch, a simple outline of the skyline, but gentle, alive. "It is good," he said softly, "keep that." And for the first time since she signed his name, she smiled without fear. 2 weeks later, the night of the Winter Charity Gala arrived. The Reed penthouse buzzed with quiet preparation, stylists and assistants moving like a small army. Emma stood before the mirror in a silver gown that shimmered softly under the lights. Her hair was swept into a low twist, her makeup subtle but elegant. She barely recognized herself. Alexander appeared in the doorway, adjusting his cufflinks. For a moment, he just looked at her. "You clean up well," he said lightly. She met his gaze in the mirror. "You sound surprised." "Only impressed," he replied, and offered his arm. The limousine glided through the city, the streets glittering with snow. Emma's heart pounded as flashes from the cameras began the moment they stepped onto the red carpet. Alexander's hand found hers, firm and steady. "Smile," he murmured. "We are supposed to look in love." She smiled because she had to, but something in the way he looked at her made it feel less like pretending. Inside the grand ballroom, crystal chandeliers cast rainbows across the marble floor. Guests turned to watch the billionaire heir and his mysterious wife. The air buzzed with whispers. Claire approached with a clipboard and whispered, "Remember the plan. Smile, greet the board, and dance once before leaving." Emma nodded, keeping her composure. Throughout the evening, Alexander was the perfect gentleman. He introduced her to investors, guided her through conversations, and shielded her from prying questions. Yet every time their eyes met, there was something unscripted, something neither could name. When the orchestra began a slow waltz, Alexander turned to her. "We should dance." Appearances, remember? She nodded, placing her hand in his. As they moved together under the lights, she realized his touch was warm, not the practice pressure of a rehearsed partner, but genuine. You are trembling, he said softly. I have never danced in a room like this, she admitted. Just look at me, he said. Ignore everyone else. So she did. And for those 3 minutes, surrounded by hundreds of strangers, it felt as if they were the only two people in the world. When the song ended, applause filled the room. Cameras flashed. Emma stepped back, breathless. Alexander leaned closer, his voice low. You did well. But as they walked off the floor, a woman approached, a tall brunette with sharp eyes and an even sharper smile. Alexander, she said sweetly. You did not tell me you finally got married. He stiffened slightly. Hello, Victoria. Emma recognized her immediately from the company press releases. Victoria Lane, Alexander's former fiancée and current rival executive. This must be your wife, Victoria said, looking Emma up and down. Quite the upgrade from your usual type. Emma's smile did not falter. It is nice to meet you. Likewise, Victoria replied, her tone dripping with poison. I hope this marriage lasts longer than your last merger. Before Emma could respond, Alexander's hand tightened on hers. Excuse us, he said, guiding her away. Once they reached the quiet of the balcony, Emma exhaled. She seems lovely, she said dryly. He chuckled softly. Do not let her get under your skin. She wants a reaction. She got one, Emma said. From you. His expression softened. You handled it well. Better than most would. She looked at him then, really looked. The man behind the empire, the control, the calculated words, there was loneliness there, carefully hidden. You do not have to be perfect all the time, she said. Neither do you, he answered. The air between them shifted again, charged and unspoken. Snow began to fall outside the balcony railing, delicate flakes drifting through the city lights. He brushed one from her hair, fingers lingering just a second too long. Let us go, he said finally, his voice lower than before. Tomorrow will be full of headlines. That night, as Emma slipped off her heels and stared at her reflection in the penthouse mirror, she knew something had changed. The line between what was real and what was pretend had started to blur. She remembered his words from earlier, we are supposed to look in love. And yet, every time he touched her hand, it felt less and less like acting. The weeks after the gala passed in a blur of headlines and photographs. Emma and Alexander had become the city's newest fascination, the fairy tale couple that looked perfect in every frame. Behind closed doors, though, perfection was something they both had to practice. Every morning began with press calls, every evening with scheduled appearances. The contract had demanded a performance, but neither of them had expected the performance to start feeling real. One quiet evening, Alexander returned home earlier than usual. Emma was sitting on the living room floor surrounded by paper sketches, notes, and a pile of unpaid medical bills she still had not dared to show him. He paused by the doorway. You should not worry about those anymore, he said softly. She looked up, startled. How did you? Claire told me, he said. I paid them. You had no right, she said, standing abruptly. That was my responsibility. You signed a contract with me, he replied calmly. Your well-being reflects mine. I was only protecting my investment. The word stung. Investment? That is what I am to you? He exhaled, rubbing his temple. That is not what I meant. No, I think that is exactly what you meant, she said, her voice trembling. She turned away before he could see her tears. Later that night, she found him in his study, staring at an old photograph of his parents. His expression was unreadable. You think I do not care, he said quietly, not looking up. But caring has cost me everything once before. I learned to keep distance because closeness always comes with a price. She leaned against the doorframe, her anger cooling into understanding. You cannot live like that forever, Alexander. And you cannot keep running from help, he answered. Their eyes met, two people built from pride and fear, finally seeing themselves reflected in each other. Over the following days, something subtle began to shift. He started having breakfast with her instead of at his desk. She began joining him at evening meetings, learning about the foundation his company sponsored. The walls between them thinned, not through grand gestures but through quiet moments of shared joke, a brief glance, the way his voice softened when he said her name. One night, as snow fell outside the windows, Alexander invited her to the rooftop garden. The city shimmered below them. Do you ever think about after this? She asked, her breath clouding in the cold air. After the contract ends? All the time, he admitted. I thought I would be relieved when it is over. Now I am not so sure. She turned to face him, her eyes searching. What are you saying? He hesitated. I am saying that somewhere between pretending and surviving, you became the most honest thing in my life. The confession hung between them, fragile and unplanned. She felt her heart stumble, unsure whether to believe him. Do not say things you cannot mean, she whispered. I mean every word, he said, stepping closer. But I will not ask for something you are not ready to give. The air crackled with silence. For the first time, she saw the man behind the sea of loneliness, the restraint, the hope. She wanted to say something, but the moment was broken by the sharp ring of his phone. He glanced at the screen, his face darkening. It is the board, he said quietly. Something is wrong. The next morning, headlines exploded across every business channel. Someone had leaked internal company emails, claiming Alexander's marriage was a staged act to secure his inheritance. Photographs from their contract signing private ones were attached as proof. Emma's world tilted. Paparazzi swarmed the building, reporters shouting questions. Was it all for money? Are you even his real wife? Alexander ordered security to block them, his jaw tight. I will fix this, he told her. How? She asked, voice shaking. By doing exactly what I should have done from the start, he said. By telling the truth. That night, as the city buzzed with scandal, Emma stood by the window watching the snow melt into rain. The fairy tale had cracked open, exposing what it really was, a fragile, human story of two people who never meant to fall in love. The next morning, chaos filled the lobby of Reed Enterprises. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted, and security struggled to hold them back. Inside the boardroom, Alexander faced 12 shareholders, their eyes sharp with judgment. You have embarrassed this company, one of them snapped. Your marriage was a lie, and now the stock is falling. Alexander stood tall, his voice calm but edged with steel. It was not a lie, he said. It began as a contract, yes, but it became something more. If you cannot tell the difference between business and humanity, perhaps you should not lead this company at all. The room fell silent. Outside that glass wall, Emma waited, clutching the small notebook she always carried. She had come to stand by him, even if it meant being judged by everyone. When Alexander emerged, she stepped forward. What happens now? She asked. They will vote tomorrow, he said. My cousin is pushing for my removal. Because of me, she whispered. Because of us, he corrected. That night, she could not sleep. Memories replayed the first signature, the fake smiles, the real laughter. Everything that had started as survival had turned into something that terrified her more than poverty ever did love. At dawn, she packed a small suitcase and wrote a note. You taught me that love is not a contract. But I cannot be the reason you lose everything. I am sorry. When Alexander woke, she was gone. Her ring lay on the dining table, next to her sketch of the city skyline. He picked it up slowly, his chest tight. Claire entered quietly. She left for her father's hospital, she said. Do you want me to send someone after her? He shook his head. No. If I have to find her, I will do it myself. Hours later, Alexander stood before the board again. "Before you vote," he said, placing Emma's sketch on the table, "you should know why I married her. It was not for money or control. It was because I was too afraid to believe someone could see me beyond this title. She did. And I will not apologize for that." The room murmured. One of the older board members, a man who had known his father, leaned forward. "Your father built this company on integrity, not image," he said. "If you can keep that spirit alive, the company stays yours." The motion to remove him was denied. Alexander exhaled, relief flooding through him, but victory felt hollow without her. 2 days later, he drove 3 hours north to a small town hospital. The winter sky was pale, the air biting cold. Through the window of a modest café across the street, he saw her Emma, in a thick coat, sketching quietly with a cup of coffee. She looked tired, but peaceful. When he entered, the bell chimed softly. She looked up, her eyes widening. "Alexander," she breathed. "You should not be here." "Then why does it feel like I am exactly where I am supposed to be?" he said gently. "You did not lose the company?" "No," he said with a small smile. "Turns out honesty is good for business." She looked down at her hands. "I never meant to make your life harder." "You made it real," he said. "I lived years surrounded by people who wanted what I had, not who I was. You changed that." He took a small velvet box from his coat pocket and placed it on the table. Inside was a simple gold band, not the diamond from their contract, but something pure and unpretentious. "No terms, no timelines," he said quietly. "Just one promise that I will choose you, even when life gets complicated." Her eyes filled with tears. "You do not have to do this." "I know," he said. "That is why it matters." She hesitated for only a heartbeat before nodding, tears spilling over as she whispered, "Yes." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and endless, as if the world itself was starting over. Months later, the Reed Foundation opened a new art center for underprivileged youth. Above the entrance hung a small plaque engraved with her words, "Signed once for money, sealed forever for love." And in that simple truth, their story began again, not as a contract, but as a choice. Spring came quietly, washing the city in pale sunlight and soft winds. It had been 3 months since Alexander and Emma's quiet wedding at the small chapel near the Hudson. There had been no photographers, no reporters, no guests in diamonds, only the sound of church bells and the scent of lilacs that Emma had picked herself. Life had changed, but in a way that felt gentle, grounded. The mansion no longer echoed with silence, laughter filled it now. Alexander had learned to make breakfast, though his pancakes were uneven, and Emma had filled the walls with her sketches, little moments of their life together. One morning, he found her in the studio, leaning over a large canvas. "You have been working on that for days," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "It is almost done," she replied, smiling. "It is called the second signature." He tilted his head. "And what does it mean?" "It means," she said softly, "that some signatures are for business, and some are for love." He kissed the top of her head. "Then I am glad I signed both with you." They shared a quiet laugh, the kind that came easily now, without fear or distance. But peace was never permanent in their world. Later that afternoon, Claire arrived with news. "The annual corporate summit is in 2 weeks," she said. "They want you both there. It will be the first time since, well, everything." Alexander nodded slowly. "Then we will go," he said. "No hiding anymore." The summit was held in a grand hall overlooking Central Park, filled with executives, shareholders, and cameras. Emma wore a simple navy dress, her hair loose over her shoulders. Alexander stood beside her, hand in hers, calm but alert. When the event began, one journalist shouted, "Mr. Reed, after all that happened last year, why bring your wife here now?" Alexander turned toward the crowd, his voice clear. "Because she is not my scandal. She is my strength." The room went silent. He continued, "You can measure success in profit, but I measure it in truth. The truth is, I am a better man because of her. Emma's throat tightened as applause slowly spread across the room. Later that night, on the drive home, she whispered, "You did not have to say all that." "I wanted to," he said simply. For the first time, it was not for the cameras. As the skyline glowed outside their car window, she reached for his hand. "Do you ever think about how strange it all was? How we met, how it began?" He smiled faintly. "Every day. And every day, I am grateful for the mistake that brought us here." In the months that followed, they built something lasting. The art center she dreamed of opened its doors, offering free workshops and exhibits. Children painted, adults learned to sketch again, and in one corner of the gallery hung her painting, The Second Signature. Underneath, a small note read, "To the man who taught me that love is not an agreement but a daily choice." Alexander would visit often, watching her teach, his face soft with quiet pride. One evening, he found her sitting on the floor, surrounded by students' drawings. "You look tired," he said gently. "I am happy," she corrected. "That is different." He knelt beside her. "Then we both finally learned something my father never did: how to live without pretending." Outside, rain began to fall, gentle and rhythmic against the glass. Emma leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you think we will ever stop proving ourselves?" "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe we just keep signing new chapters together." She smiled. "As long as we sign them side by side." The next morning, sunlight poured into the studio, painting gold across the walls. On the table lay two sketchbooks filled with art, his with notes and ideas. Across the first page of his, written in her handwriting, were the words, "Love is the only contract that renews itself every day." Alexander smiled, tracing the words with his thumb. Outside the window, life moved on, quiet, simple, real. For the first time in a long time, there were no secrets, no lies, no contracts to sign. Just love, honest and unguarded, written not on paper but in the everyday moments that made them whole again. Summer arrived with the scent of blooming magnolias and the hum of life in full motion. Emma's art center had become a quiet success story, featured in magazines and community papers for its impact on young artists. Alexander often dropped by unannounced, always dressed sharply but never carrying the weight of the corporate world when he was there. He would roll up his sleeves, help move easels, or pour coffee for volunteers, earning smiles that no press conference ever could. One evening, Emma found him standing by the doorway of her studio, watching a group of students finish their paintings. "You look proud," she teased. He smiled. "I am. Of them. Of you. Of what we built together." She walked over, brushing a streak of paint off her cheek. "You know, none of this would have happened if not for that ridiculous contract." "Then maybe it was the best business deal I ever made," he said. She laughed softly, leaning into his chest. The sound of laughter and conversation filled the room as the sun dipped below the skyline. Life had settled into something beautiful, steady, genuine, earned. But beneath that peace lingered the kind of vulnerability that comes only when you finally have something to lose. One morning, Alexander received a call that brought it all rushing back. The board wanted him to attend an international conference in London for 2 months. It would be the longest they had been apart since their wedding. When he told her, she hid her disappointment behind a smile. "You have to go," she said. "This is who you are." "It is who I was," he corrected. "But I will go, because we have built something worth protecting." The night before his flight, they sat on the balcony, the city glowing beneath them. "Do you remember the first time you told me to smile for the cameras?" she asked. "Of course," he said, chuckling. "You were terrified of falling in those heels." "And you were terrified of falling for me," she said playfully. He turned toward her, eyes warm. "I still am. Every day." She rested her hand over his heart. "Then promise me something," she whispered. "No matter how far you go, do not forget where we started." "I could never forget," he said, pulling her close. "Because every road still leads back to you." When he left the next morning, she stood by the window watching his car disappear into the flow of traffic. The apartment felt too quiet, the silence familiar but no longer welcome. She walked into his study and saw the notebook he had left on his desk. On the first page were 6 simple words written in his neat handwriting, "For Emma, our real story begins now." She closed the book and smiled through tears. 2 months later, the world saw Alexander Reed not just as a powerful CEO but as a man changed by love. And when he returned home, the first thing he did was walk into her studio, still smelling of paint and coffee, and kiss her without a word. The cameras that once chased them were gone, the contracts long forgotten. What remained was the promise they had rewritten together, one that needed no signatures, only hearts that kept choosing each other, day after day. Autumn arrived quietly, painting the city in gold and rust. The leaves drifted across the streets, and with them came a new chapter for Emma and Alexander. Their lives had found rhythm again, morning coffee together, evenings spent planning the next community exhibit, and quiet walks through Central Park where no one cared about their last name. But success has a way of testing even the strongest hearts. One evening, Alexander received an urgent call from the foundation's legal team. A corporate merger proposal from an overseas investor threatened to buy out his family's company, the same empire his father had built decades ago. It would mean losing control of everything he had fought to preserve. Emma watched him pace the living room, tension in his shoulders. "You said you wanted less of that world," she said gently. "I did," he replied. "But if I do nothing, everything my father built, everything we have used to do good, it all disappears." She nodded, understanding. "Then fight for it. But not the way they expect you to. Fight differently." Her words stayed with him. Days later, he called an emergency press conference. Cameras flashed, questions flew, but Alexander stood at the podium with the calm confidence of a man who no longer had anything to hide. "For years," he began, "I tried to protect my father's legacy by living in his shadow. But the truth is, his greatest legacy was not the company, it was the belief that integrity matters more than power." He paused, looking directly into the camera. "So here is my decision. We are merging only if it means building something better for people, not just profits." The room erupted in questions, but Alexander had said what needed to be said. That night, when he returned home, Emma was waiting on the balcony, a cup of tea in her hands. "You sounded like a man who finally stopped pretending," she said softly. He smiled. "You sounded like the reason I did." They stood in silence for a moment, the city shimmering beneath them. "Do you know what I realized today?" he asked. "What?" she said. "That I no longer measure success by the size of my company or the weight of a contract. I measure it by how peaceful this feels being here, with you." Emma reached for his hand, her fingers cold but steady. "Then I guess we are both rich," she said. He laughed quietly, the sound low and content. "Richer than I ever imagined." A few weeks later, the foundation held its annual charity gala. Instead of the grand ballroom they once used, it was held at the art center Emma had built. Paintings by local artists lined the walls, and laughter replaced the sterile quiet of wealth. When Alexander stepped to the microphone, he looked out at the crowd and said, "The best things I ever built were not towers or hotels, they were second chances." His gaze found Emma's across the room. "And the best decision I ever made was signing one piece of paper that brought me to her." The crowd applauded, but Emma barely heard them. She was too busy watching the man who had once offered her a deal and ended up giving her everything. That night, after the guests had gone and the lights dimmed, Alexander wrapped his arms around her and whispered, "We built all this out of a mistake." She smiled against his chest. "Then I hope we keep making the right ones." Outside, the city glowed softly under the amber light, and for the first time, both of them truly felt free. Winter returned, soft and silent, blanketing the city that had once tested them in storms. Inside the Reed Art Center, the halls glowed with warm light and quiet joy. It was the one-year anniversary of the foundation's reopening, and the crowd was smaller this time, friends, colleagues, the students whose lives had changed because of Emma's vision. Alexander stood at the back of the room, watching her move through the crowd, graceful and calm, her laughter echoing through the space like a melody he would never tire of hearing. When she finally joined him, she handed him a glass of champagne. "You did not make a speech tonight," she said with a teasing smile. "You have stolen that job from me," he replied. "Besides, I think this room speaks for us." Around them hung the paintings of artists they had helped, each one a story of hope, transformation, and kindness. Near the entrance was Emma's latest paisa portrait titled The Promise. It showed two hands holding a single pen above a faint outline of a heart. Beneath it was engraved a single line, signed once for money, sealed forever for love. Alexander ran his fingers lightly over the inscription. "You still remember every word," she said softly. "How could I forget?" he murmured. "It is where everything began." They stepped outside onto the snowy terrace. The city stretched below, glittering under the winter moon. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, "what would have happened if I had said no that day in the café? Then I suppose I would have been just another man with too much money and not enough meaning," he said. "But you did say yes. And it saved me." She smiled. "I thought I was saving myself." "Maybe we saved each other," he said. Snowflakes landed on her eyelashes, catching the light. He brushed them away gently. "You know," she said, "for someone who started this with a contract, you have turned out to be a hopeless romantic." "I blame you," he replied, laughing softly. "You made me believe in something better than perfection." From inside, a soft piano melody began to play. Emma looked back through the glass doors, where their friends were gathering near the cake. "Come on," she said. "They are waiting." But he caught her hand before she could move. "Wait," he said, "before we go in, there is one more thing." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn but familiar. It was their original contract. "You kept this?" she asked, her eyes wide. "Yes," he said. "Because every story deserves a beginning." But this, he tore the paper cleanly in half, letting the pieces drift away on the cold wind. "This deserves a new one." She stood on her toes and kissed him, the kind of kiss that did not ask for anything, only promised everything. The snow swirled around them, quiet and endless, as the city lights shimmered below. And when they finally turned back toward the warmth inside, Alexander smiled and said, "Come on, Mrs. Reed. Let us go sign our next chapter." In that moment, nothing else mattered, not the contracts, not the scandals, not the past. Just two people, standing where it all began, choosing each other again and again, proving that love, once real, never needed signatures to last forever.